All right, my babies. Now, mother script is referencing the Tao Te Ching, and it goes like this. In the Tao, the master anticipates difficulty, even when the task is easy. My notes on it are difficult implies reward on the small things, whilst easy implies frustration on the small things. So here it is. In the Tao, the master anticipates difficulty even when the task is easy. Difficult means we're rewarded on the small things, and easy means we're frustrated on the small things. Interactively, deciding if a task is difficult or easy is our judgment of it, right? So, yeah, because if you're looking at a task as easy or difficult, either way, you're judging. And that judgment leads to a certain way of approach. The reason I'm saying judgment, not opinion, is because an opinion normally is an opinion. When we form an opinion, we're forming it in order for us to kind of get feedback. And if we don't follow the feedback that we get from the opinion and introduce a change to the opinion itself, what happens is then the opinion itself becomes a judgment. Because ultimately, if I form an opinion on something and I stick with it, then the energy that I'm putting on the opinion is not the same as energy that I'm putting on the thing itself. It becomes this is what I think, and that basically is a judgment from our side, which normally leads to us erroring. Which okay, we're erring on the side of how we're interacting and treating whatever it is we're judging, regardless if it's a good judgment or a bad judgment. Because that kind of like it's like painting a picture and refusing to dig deeper, basically. That's what a judgment is for now, for me. So when you look at a task and you decide if it's easy or difficult, with both of them, you're actually forming a judgment. But at the very least, when you decide it's easy, then you kind of lose a certain meticulousness in your approach. Because if it's easy, that means you know how to do it, which means you're going to act with it based on the knowledge that you already have. And by doing that, you're removing that interactivity that I mentioned earlier. Your that judgment is making you lose the details, the the details that you're like. I'm looking at the process or I'm looking at the outcome. And when you're looking at the process, you're always searching for details. But when you're looking for the outcome, what effectively you're doing is you're building around a certain you're building around a certain image and you're forming things around that image. That's because we're judging it. So, but here he says a master anticipates difficulty. So anticipating difficulty is not a judgment, right? This is quoted from the Tao Te Ching. Because if I'm looking at something and I say it's difficult, I'm judging it. But if I'm anticipating difficulty, that means I'm allowing myself a mental framework. See, but look at what just happened right now. Because I was explaining how the statement difficult and easy are judgments. I suddenly was like, there's no way a book like the Tao Te Ching would actually point at something, would explain something in a way where it's pointing at it and making a judgment. And then I reread it, and the master anticipates difficulty even when the task is easy. Which means if he's doing the task and feeling that it's easy, It's an easy task to do. He intentionally anticipates difficulty. And what I explained it here, I explained it in a very, if it's difficult or if it's easy. No, I did something wrong here, but my approach was correct. I just framed it in a very judgmental way. Because here I say difficult means reward on the small things, which is very true. Because if you're anticipating difficulty, then you're always looking out for things that could probably be more than you're expecting, which means you're noticing the things that you're doing correctly, you're noticing the ways that you're actually building properly, and you're kind of like building that, I would say, that dopamine cycle. Because ultimately I'm anticipating difficulty, but that kind of like finished. Oh, Yuki, that finished. Amazing, that finished. Bro, what's going on? Right? And then by the end of it, you kind of like lowered your expectations of the actual, like, you anticipating difficulty basically allowed your action to rise above your anticipations, which kind of make you feel like which allow you to kind of like build that confidence, I guess, that confidence that I anticipated difficulty and I powered through with it. It doesn't really mean that it's easy. But even when the task is easy, like mundane task is easy, if I look at something and I declare it to be easy, then effectively I'm going to get frustrated on the smallest thing that didn't work because it's easy. I can do it, whatever it is, right? Like my judgment on it is like I lowered the bar of basically like I lowered the bar of the task itself, which means anytime I'm not able to jump that bar or reach above it or overcome the bar, I'm going to reflect that on myself. I'm going to reflect it from a frustrational standpoint because effectively, why am I not being able to do it? Instead of like, what about it am I missing in order for it to get done? And so anticipating difficulty kind of seems like you're projecting your energy onto the outside, onto the outside, which basically, so I think there's a trick behind it because effectively what you're doing is kind of relinquishing your own responsibility. And if something goes wrong, you're blaming it on the task, but you're not blaming it. You're placing that responsibility on the task, and then because you're not taking it personal, you're kind of figuring it out. But if you take it personal, you're going to be figuring out what you're doing wrong instead of like looking at the task and what needs to be done. So it feels like it's just the difference in reflectivity between you actually getting being full of yourself and you humbling yourself. And funny enough, what I'm thinking about right now is the bladesmiths. I've been in that binge where I watch bladesmiths before I fall asleep every night. And just the whole idea of uh, how they're actually working on the blade and how it's like uh, most of the time it's particular movements. Like if they're hammering on it, if they're scraping it, if they're shaving it, if they're heating it, it's the same movement for a long period of time. And the idea is that you keep plowing into it. And that is a state of flow. And that's probably the hardest thing to do because every single time they hammer, it's kind of like creating that small dent, which effectively at one point is going to be reflected by the end result. But even though it's a simple movement, the entire task is not, oh, okay, I can forge it. I can forge steel. The entire task becomes how many times can I consistently forge steel before having to basically take a step back, I guess, and look at my work properly. Because the task is easy, just hammer. But the truth is, like, because it leads to something bigger, then there's a lot more difficulty in it than meets the eye. And that's basically the humbling experience because, and I love it because like they beat it like three, four times and then they look at it and then they beat it again and then they look at it and then they beat it again and they look at it. And you can imagine that's the simplest thing because all you're doing is beating on like hot steel. But that's where the difficulty lies. They make it look easy, but only because every single time they approach it with that like eye. Like there's difficulty in this, which allows them to like only look at it instead of look at themselves, and which gives them a certain kind of like flow and allows them to reach a focus state that gives them flow and kind of like makes things work. Damn it, man. I love this. Thank you very much, by the way, for like watching these things with me. Amazing. I love you guys. It's a video.